And, there's so many people that do mic shootouts. You know who didn't do those? The Beatles. I think it's just kind of silly in a way, just get sing into the microphone that's there,
right,
and make it work. But that being said, the SM7's pretty rugged and, it's very universal mic. So is a U87 or a U47, whatever. But you can't really go wrong with that on vocals for almost anybody.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hello, rock stars. It's your host, Lid Shaw. Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I created this show to introduce you to real-world recording professionals, to hear their stories and learn from their experiences so that you can take your records to the next level and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Jim Reilley, a songwriter, producer, and recording artist from Nashville, Tennessee. I've known Jim for years as an incredibly prolific songwriter and have been Jim's recording engineer when he was producing for the artist Stephanie Quayle. Jim's band, the New Dillons, with Reese Campbell, started back in 1986 when they recorded with the rhythm section of 10,000 Maniacs and landed critical acclaim for their folk rock sound. Michael Stipe of R.E.M. called them one of his top 10 bands for 1986. The New Dillons continued through breakups and makeups over the decades that follow and have more recently released a fantastic new album called Meta. Jim moved to Nashville in 1998 and landed a publishing deal with Curb Publishing, where he wrote songs for nearly a decade. Over 45 of Jim's songs were recorded by artists including Vince Gill, Hal Ketchum, Jack Ingram, Tim O'Brien, Sam Bush, and many others. I know Jim from the studio as a producer, where he is also very prolific and is often producing sessions back to back. He has a no-bullshit, fast and fearless production style that demands great performances from the musicians and might track more than 10 songs in a single day. I know, I was there. I'm psyched to be joining Jim at his writing office right here in Nashville, Tennessee. Please welcome Jim Reilley to Recording Studio Rockstars. Jim, are you ready to rock?
I'm ready to folk rock.
Oh, yeah, dude. Did you like that? I wasn't sure. I wrote that in there, and I was like,
nice.
I didn't know I was going to go for it.
I was going to say alt rock. I'm ready to alt rock, Lish.
Alt rock is, when I moved to Nashville, that was kind of when alt rock started, 91.
Mm-hmm. I like that intro, too. I'd like to take you with me everywhere I go, and then I don't have to say anything.
I'm happy to do it. But unfortunately, I'm still going to ask you to introduce yourself in your own words a little bit and just tell us more about how you got here.
Well, I'd been on the road in the 90s. My band, as you said, the New Dillons, started in 1986, and I've been full-time making music now. This will be my 30th year. Still haven't learned enough to say no and get out.
Yeah.
It's been, quite a journey. And, sometimes when you do things like this or when you do interviews and like performing songwriter or American songwriter, some of those things where you look back and you start thinking about all the things you've done. And even when someone says it is kind of funny to sort of sit there and you remember, like I remember when I did get the Vince Gill cut, or I remember, when Michael Stipe called us his favorite band or whatever, those kind of things stick with you, and you get little mileposts of your life. You break them up into mileposts, and over, I guess, 30 years, I've been lucky enough to have a few, and yet there's still a lot of people out there who don't know who I am, which is fine. And, I've kind of given up trying to persuade the world that I'm who I wanted to be.
As good as you are, actually are.
I'm very comfortable in where I am now in Nashville. And, I've been here almost 20 years, and it's kind of where you have to be these days to make music and make a living.
Well, especially as a songwriter too.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. And I kind of do split my personality in half, where I'm partially, writing songs, partially producing songs, and partially where I also do sometimes perform and make records on my own. So that helps too with the studio thing, where I'm not such an oppressive producer because I do have an outlet for my own music. So that helps.
Yeah, I described you as a no bullshit producer, but you're pretty laid back in the studio too. The no bullshit fact was that you're like straight down to work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's what I appreciate. I like to get home.
Yeah. I mean, I think we did do 10
on TV.
I'm pretty sure we did 10 songs in one session.
I think you're right. And that was great. But it also helps when you're a badass producer or a badass, engineer like you are. You don't always get that luxury, unfortunately.
I spun the intro just that way so that you'd have to compliment me in the beginning of the podcast.
Well played. Yeah. So, that helps. And, you go back and you start looking at some of the things. I'm kind of notorious for revisiting things that inspired me back when I was first starting out. And like occasionally I'll go back, even as a songwriter, I'll go back and look at a song like Goodbye Yellow Brick Road or something like that and type it out so I could see how the lyrics fall and where the rhymes fall. And, if I get stuck on whatever they call writer's block or whatever, I'll go back and look at those things and just see where, the things that influenced me and how they fell. And when you look at some of the words on some of the songs that really inspired me, it's amazing that there's only like 2 verses and a small chorus. And here in Nashville, everyone's like, well, you got to have a bridge and the second chorus has to be different. And not really, and I mean, some of the songs are so small and, brevity is really important. I also feel that in studio, like you mentioned, you knock them out quick. I mean, that doesn't always work. You don't always have the luxury of having a great engineer or great players or great artist.
Yeah, we had a great band in there.
Yeah, it was great crack band, and that helps. And in our particular situation where we worked together, Stephanie was great. She's on fire right now with a new single. She's a hard worker. A lot of times artists are self-sabotagers, and they set themselves up to fail. And, you got to be careful not to be too heavy-handed. I try not to be too heavy-handed. Yet at the same time, when something's probably not going to work, there's a trust factor there. Hopefully the artist trusts you and that's why they hired you, is because you've done this before and maybe they haven't.
Yeah. I mean, I felt like I picked up on that. Those would be the 2 things I would describe of your production maybe would be that there was, you could call it when something wasn't right, but the flip side was you struck me as having come in prepared for the session. Like you already knew what you wanted and where and how you wanted it. Or if the drummer suggested, hey, maybe we should, this should be a real 4 on the floor thing. You had a trust for him and you just went for it.
That's why I hired those people. And, I always try and hire good people so that they bring something. And I don't claim to know everything. I study like those Brian Wilson outtakes from Pet Sounds. I listen to those where, someone like Hal Blaine is saying, "Hi, Brian, I think we should use the tom instead of the snare." And Brian's like, well, let's try it then, and people know Brian Wilson as being this sort of Svengali, having everything in his brain. And, and certainly he did script a lot of that and it was genius. Doesn't hurt any. But at the same time, he was willing to listen to those musicians because he admired them. That's why he hired them. He wanted them all the musicians that they used on the Phil Spector sessions. And that was his call. That was his go-to, was that those are the songs that influenced him and inspired him. So he got to the point where he could hire those people and did. And then, of course, you don't want to, betray that. You want to trust them since you've hired them. And so he was willing to do that. And so if a producer like Brian Wilson is willing to let that slide, then I certainly am going to let it slide.
So that's perfect segue too, because I always like to ask the guests to start us off with an inspirational quote. I think you just came up with one, which is hire those you admire, right?
Yeah, that's great.
We'll start with that one. And do you have another quote you want to share with us to kind of kick it off?
He who live in glass houses should dress in basement. I don't know. No, but that's not really a studio quote really per se, but it applies.
It helps.
No, I don't really have, certain things work, but I'm always willing to be challenged and also proven wrong.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's great to hear that story about Brian Wilson. I mean, that's, you're absolutely right. You think of him as somehow having all the answers, like Nikola Tesla in the studio or something, But to know that he was totally open to suggestions and changes and try new stuff. Yeah. What are some other producers that you really have admired and people that, you've sort of studied their methods and techniques?
Sure. I mean, like that kind of goes back to, George Martin and Jeff Emmerich, who his technies actually were production techniques in a way, I guess you could say. The way he mic'd the drums for Ringo and close mic'd the drums that were, he was getting trouble in Abbey Road for doing that because it was not the way they're supposed to do it. They're all walking around with white coats on, lab coats. And he's like distort micing the drums, which is what made that song Rain so amazing. And yet I'm sure he got slings and arrows for that, so that brave move.
At least they took away his white lab coat, maybe.
Which is, the best thing.
So one of the details about Abbey Road that I always loved learning about, I don't even remember what it was called. It was the big, huge book, the $100 book about the recording there.
Yeah.
And they said that all the gear was impedance matched at 200 ohms.
That's hilarious.
And I still don't think I know exactly what that means, but that sounds cool as shit.
Right. Yeah. It's that clinical.
Yeah. Everything sounded perfect together. If you plugged anything into anything at all, it sounded great, And
now it's all at Paul McCartney's studio because they're selling it all. So all that gear and everything pretty much is gone. The stuff the Beatles used is pretty much gone.
Well, it's all right. They've turned it all into plugins, haven't they? So Jim, I like to ask you to share a story with us about an important failure for you in your career of recording,
I've got
songwriting.
plenty.
Because I mean, you've come a long way with this, and it's nice to kind of bring it back and humanize the story and help people realize that they're not alone when they struggle with stuff in the studio.
Yeah, I mean, in a studio kind of failure.
Sure, studio, songwriting, music career, whatever.
A songwriting failure that it wasn't necessarily a failure, but it was kind of a cautionary tale, maybe, of the business that is kind of funny. I had a song that I wrote with an artist who was on Warner Brothers. She was an artist on Warner Brothers and a writer at Warner Brothers and was working with Paul Worley, great producer here in town. And we wrote the song. Her producer really liked it and she loved it and she wanted to cut the song. And yet she was waiting for him because he was working on, I think maybe the Dixie Chicks or something great, huge. And, she was a new artist. So it was kind of, you have to wait till I'm done with this project or I'm making $800,000 and then I'll do your project. We had this song and I was pretty proud of it. It was one of my favorite songs still to this day. It was probably 10 years ago now, 8. She recorded a demo of it that he loved and, was probably just going to be sexed up for the record, because I produced the demo and I was really proud of it. So anyway, long and short of it is she never did the record. It never ended up happening. So her plugger at Warner Brothers, when you write a song with another songwriter that's at another publishing company, my plugger at Curb would have pitched it and Warner Brothers, her publisher would have pitched it. So
you get a double pitched.
Right. And that was one of the main reasons Nashville kind of, the publishers back in the day wanted people to co-write so that there was more opportunity for a song to get cut. There was multiple people pitching it as opposed to just one. So her publisher pitched the song to, ironically, a Curb artist. And the Curb artist loved the song. And she was in a band. She was the lead singer of a band that was signed to Curb. Curb record staff goes to my publisher, the Curb Publishing, and says, why didn't you pitch us this song? So there was that weirdness anyway. And then the song ends up getting cut. Then the producer takes the artist from the band and takes that song and the artist and takes them to another record label and leaves the record label, leaves Curb. So then the new record label gets excited about this artist and wants that to be her first single. So me as a songwriter is jumping up and down because I'm like, oh, this is great. This song kind of took all kinds of turns. Now it's going to be her first single on RCA. It's a major. Then Curb, my own publisher, Mike Curb, refuses to sign the dual license that RCA needed out of spite, essentially. So that she couldn't take that song away. And so then the band on Curb gets a new lead singer and they recut the song. So now I've got a song that's been recut by the artist, a new artist, and the lead singer that loved the song can't have it. So she goes on RCA and her career kind of falls apart. Then the band recuts the song and then the band gets dropped. And so then Mike Curb has Leanne Rimes cut the song. So Leanne Rimes cuts the song. Then there's all that lawsuit with Leanne Rimes and Curb. And so then the song never comes out, ever.
So it's like a Seinfeld episode.
It is kind of similar. Or if you've ever watched if you go to YouTube, the Turtles, there's a rock band from the 60s, and they show this flow chart of them at a blackboard with their different managements that they've had, and it's genius. And everyone that wants to get into this business should see that. Anyway, just go to YouTube and look up the Turtles management, and the one manager screws the other manager, and then they rehire the first manager, and then he fires them, and they go to the fourth manager. It's just amazing. Anyway, so then the artist I wrote it with gets on Nashville Star, and ends up singing the song on Nashville Star. So finally it found a little bit of a home, and I still get money for it, in the mailbox, but not much. But anyway, at least the song, the song had been cut many times and never really, you'd think if a song gets cut, you're set. Not at all.
Not at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got to keep being revitalized.
Right.
I'm sure.
Right.
So Jim, now share with us a moment of success for you, something where everything really, that was sort of like the last story was kind of like success that just kept teasing you along the way. Tell us the story where things really did come together well for you.
Well, I think that getting cuts, in Nashville is tough, and it's getting harder and harder. I remember I wrote a song with an artist named Lauren Lucas. We wrote the song and I kind of sang the work tape. She was still kind of trying to figure out the rhythm, and she wanted me to sing it in my way so that she could kind of follow that rhythm and learn it that way.
Can you explain to our listeners what a work tape is?
Sure. Back in the old days when there used to be tape, now it's a cell phone voice memo, but essentially, when you write a song, the day you write it or as you're writing it, you just record little bits and pieces of it or rough work tape of it. A lot of times people now are writing in the studio, so they've actually got a really great version of it from the very beginning. But back in the day, a lot of times I just have a little Panasonic cassette recorder and a bunch of blank cassettes.
With the play and the record button you had to push down together?
At the same time. Yeah. Basically, a work tape is just, that. It's just a working version of the song and a very rough approximation of it. And just so all the chords are there and the melodies there and the lyrics are there. And sometimes, you don't even finish the lyrics. They're work in progress, and the work tape just reminds you where they go or whatever.
And the next stage is demo.
Yeah, typically,
at least for Nashville songwriting.
And so this particular situation, we had done the work tape, and I think she was cutting like the next week. And so there was no demo of it. It was just a work tape.
And cutting, of course, means making the master recording.
Song, but yeah, by the actual, in a major studio doing it right for the record. So they're recording the song, and the story that was told to me, it could be apocryphal, but the story that was told to me was that Vince Gill took my work tape of the song, put it in his pickup truck, and drove around the block learning the song to sing harmony to, because it was her lead. Literally a week after we wrote the thing, or a couple weeks after we wrote the thing, it's being recorded by a major artist like Vince Gill on a major label, Warner Brothers, on her first debut record, as opposed to her second debut record, And that's from inception to finished product in 2 weeks, which is rare and unheard of.
Yeah, really.
So that was a big moment, because I didn't even know he was involved. I knew that she was cutting it. And then my publisher says, should we tell him? And I'm like, tell me what? And they're like, that Vince Gill sang harmony. And I'm like, what? So that was great. So that was a big moment.
That's great. Yeah, that's got to be really exciting. And so you heard about it after it was when it's being recorded.
Right. I would have loved to have been there, but of course they know better than to ask songwriters to come to sessions. No one wants that. Hey, you should sing it like this, and telling Vince Gill how to do it.
Let me jump to some other kind of specific studio questions for you too. I wanted to ask you, like, for example, these might sound a little general, but what does production mean to you? What do you do when you produce a record?
That's a good question. And a lot of artists want to know that too when I come to ask for money. It's different for every artist, and every production I do is different in one sense. And that is that I kind of look at the artist that I'm working with and then decide how much influence or intervention there should be on my part, I guess. Typically, an artist that I produce, usually I'm a fan of, most always now.
That's luckily, a nice luxury.
Luckily, yeah. Kind of a lot of times I'll just kind of let things happen, sit back and let it happen, and then arrest something that isn't working too well or something, as opposed to getting too, like I say, heavy-handed and oppressive about it. I've seen where producers have been that way, and it works sometimes, but I don't like to be that guy. My whole philosophy when I produce someone, I always say, what I'd like for you to do is have a record where you can, like, you meet a random stranger at an airport and you haven't said, like they say, well, what do you do? What are you all about? And you just hand them the CD and you don't have to say anything else. In terms of music, like it doesn't say what kind of person you are or whatever, but this is the kind of music I do. Like I don't need to say, well, it's kind of folky poppy, but it's blues and it's Cajun and it's punk gospel, and the music will speak for itself. If I did my job right, then they're proud enough to give that without having to say, well, yeah, the producer wanted me to do this, but I didn't want to do. And I've had so many people give me projects that they've done where they've had to qualify every, virtually every song on the record. I'm like, I just want to listen to it.
If we do enough qualifying of our own work, we don't need to qualify the producer's work too, right?
Right. Yeah. So, hopefully that to me is a successful production. It does me no good to produce something on someone that they're not happy with, because ultimately I want return business,
right.
I want them to be proud of it. I want to give them what they asked me for in the first place. As much as I could want to maybe influence certain aspects of things, sometimes I will put my foot down and say, yeah, I really think you're wrong about this. And, you should think about it overnight and let's come back tomorrow and see if you still feel that way, then it's your record.
Now, what about, your internal process of inspiration? Like you're like, oh man, it'd be so cool to have a 12-string line here.
Yeah.
How do you approach that? Is that something that you might have a dialogue with before you guys hit the studio?
Sometimes,
or is that in the moment and you're just feeling it out?
Yeah. I don't like to script a lot of stuff so much, because then I feel like I'm kind of tethered to that and stuck to it. But it does help when you're trying to move fast. If you've got the songs, the key, the tempo, basically.
Yeah. Isn't that the worst when you suggest an idea in the studio and then you hear it and they play it just the way you asked for it and then you immediately don't like it?
See,
and
I've never had that happen to me, Liz. I don't know what that feels like. But no, I'm just kidding. But then again, sometimes you do need to hear it to know it's wrong. I'll be the first one when we do something like that. When it's an experiment like that, I'll say, this probably isn't going to work, but can you just take 2 minutes and try this? And, and then we'll know. I'll never be a guy who's like, no, absolutely not. We can't do that. After I hear it and it's terrible, then I'll say that. But until then, I always like to try and I kind of learned some of those things, I must say, from Robert Reynolds, a dear friend of mine. And was in the band called the Mavericks. And, when I first, and Don Henry too, he's a very great producer and he knows exactly what he likes. And he's not really quite known as a producer, more as a writer. Obviously he's a genius songwriter, but he knows, and he watching him was interesting. It kind of made me, realize certain things that I didn't know. And then watching Robert Reynolds interact with the players, Robert's a very hands-off, almost an executive producer who just kind of floats in, and in and out. Mm-hmm. But he's such a great ear. He's got such a great ear and he's such a great human. And, people just love him and they will give him they'll go the extra mile for him because they love him so much, and I mean, then after that record, he and I co-produced a bunch of projects together. And it was funny because Robert isn't the guy who's going to be in the room for 10 hours and work. He's the guy who's going to be gone or on his cell phone. But then right when everyone's ready to hit a critical mass, he'll bring in donuts or something, just knows just the right time to break the mood. And, that's a whole nother level of genius, but just knowing watching him kind of work with people. I'm not the most personable person. I mean, he's such a people person. And that's really an important qualification too of being a producer, is kind of making everyone feel at ease.
He's definitely that guy. I've had the pleasure of working with Robert too. Yeah. When you talk about him showing up at the studio with a dozen donuts, it would be like that or a piece of the letters off the bow of the Titanic.
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean?
He had those things too.
He was a collector.
Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit more about your experience with engineering. Have you gotten into the engineering side of stuff?
Not a lot. I always kind of laugh along when someone says, yeah, it's a flux capacitor with a 32 hertz, in and out phase shifter or whatever, blame shifter or whatever. I'll just, that's I love that gear, and anyone can catch me on that at any time, Actually, there's a really funny or die thing on YouTube or on the internet where the banjo player Noam Pikelny from Punch Brothers. He did a solo project of banjo music, and it's on Funny or Die. They have Steve Martin come in as a guest. And Steve Martin comes in and he goes to the engineers. He's like, you know what I like? The Magnum 42 with the 102 megahertz capacity microphone, and it's just, such an idiot, and a lot of players and a lot of engineers look at sometimes producers like that are like, oh, this idiot doesn't know what he's doing. So I don't ever claim to know that much. That to me is so left brained, and I'm such a right brain that I can't really. I wish I did know more, and I half of me wishes I had my own place.
But you know what things sound like.
Yeah,
you can envision a sound.
Absolutely, and
a reference for a record that you might have heard something similar on, right?
Yeah, and that helps the engineers too. But I've been lucky that I've worked only with really good engineers, and they really have that dialed in. It's not anything I feel like at this stage of the game I'm gonna have anything that's gonna help anybody. It would only be for my own good. To know that stuff.
One of the things that I remember of working with you is you seem to always have a high string guitar nearby. So tell us about that. Is that like one of your favorite tools in the studio?
It is fun. Yeah. I mean, I don't like 12 strings because they take up too much real estate usually in the track.
They fucking hurt your fingers.
Yeah, man. They're hard to play too. That helps. I'm sure a lot of people that are listening to this know what that is, but it's kind of a Nashville thing. It was kind of started, I guess, in the late 50s, early 60s to sort of mimic a 12-string sound or give this sort of shimmer to a track. And a lot of times you don't really know it's there until you take it out, and it's not something you could put a finger on unless you're familiar with the sound. But basically it's the higher strings of a 12-string guitar, six strings, and it's the upper register, the upper strings of a 12-string.
So to be more specific, clear for anybody who really can't picture it, if you strung up a 12-string, each string would have two strings that have a thick string and a thin string. Right. If you just removed all the thick strings, what's left is the high strings.
Right. The top two strings are the same as a 6-string, and then the G is a 2-octave or an octave, and then the rest is octaves.
Right.
And it just has a shimmer, and it was used in these sort of 60s country songs that Stand By Your Man. You can really hear it in there, and it adds a shimmer to the acoustic guitar. It's funny, a lot of the production stuff, a lot of the artists I'm working with these days don't want a lot of acoustic guitars. It's kind of a passé thing almost.
Really?
It's funny, yeah.
It's all about the rock and roll.
Yeah, everyone wants that rhythm track. If it's going to be rhythm, it's going to, I guess, because of Lucinda Williams and maybe, Sheryl Crow and some of where the rhythm tracks are just electric as opposed to the old acoustic thing. Mm-hmm. A lot of people think that sounds dated, and I'm almost kind of there myself now. It's funny. And I love playing acoustic guitar. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I write on acoustic guitar a lot. So it puts the track in a time period. With everything film and TV now, everyone's film and TV world this and film and TV world that, which is it's so funny because it's not really a genre, but I guess it's becoming one. If it sounds like the Black Keys, I guess it's a film and TV song.
But film and TV also means that the music is part of setting the scene and the mood. So whatever you do very much distinguishes that moment in the scene. If it sounds a little bit like this style, it completely changes
That's true.
The nature of the film or the TV show, right?
And so a lot of those are stripped down. That's kind of a standard thing. And a lot of times if it's stripped down, you strip down the acoustic to it's where it's electric is the rhythm track or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's funny, Portlandia did a skit about this is a band that only does film and TV placements.
Nice.
And they all play the same. I mean, it sounds like the Black Keys. It sounds like, some of these bands where they're kind of primarily known as film and TV bands. It's funny.
That's funny.
When they're great bands, it's sad that that's how they are known. But again, it's a different world now, and that's how people get known. That's how I find a lot of music.
A lot of artists make money.
That's how I find most of my new music is I'll be watching Girls on HBO or something like that, and at the very end, they'll do a credit roll thing, and it's this amazing song. It's like, who is that? Check on SoundHound. Next thing I'm buying it the next day.
That's wild. Yeah, that's true. And there's a gatekeeper there. There's somebody who's selecting that song.
Right.
And so, it helps it just be that much better when you first discover it.
Yeah.
So I do have a question. This actually, one of the rock stars was asking about copyright stuff, and I don't have this question right in front of me, but he was sort of posing a question within our group about putting his music up on YouTube, and he's seen other bands do that, and he was nervous and afraid that somebody was going to steal his music, and that what was he supposed to do about copyright? Can you just sort of educate people just a little bit, some of the basics about for somebody who's new and they're worried, do I put my music out there or do I not?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing because so much music is just so easy to get to now. That even trickles down here, by the way, in Nashville to like even playing the songs live. Like a publisher will tell an art or a songwriter, well, don't play that at the Bluebird because someone else will hear it and they'll rip it off. Half of me is like, well, maybe that does happen. I mean, that's happened to me. I can say that it does happen. But at the same time, you have to almost be like, then where do you play? What do you do? When do you?
Right, and that was the Bluebird.
Yeah, it didn't happen to me at the Bluebird. I can tell you the story if you're interested, and you can cut it if you don't want it. But basically, before I moved here, I was making trips down here, and I played a song for a specific publisher, and they flipped over it. The song was called "If You See Her." It's not an original title. I mean, Bob Dylan wrote a song like that. If you see her, say hello. You know, mine was just kind of an homage to that. And so I'm not claiming that I wrote the theory of relativity and someone ripped it off. This isn't a cure for cancer, you know, it's just another song. But the publishing company that I played it for was flipping over it. And it just so happens that 3 months later, I'm back in New York State before I moved here watching the Country Music Awards. And Reba McEntire and Brooks and Dunn are doing a duet of a song called If You See Him, If You See Her, who was written by one of the writers at the very publishing company that I played the song for that was flipping over the song.
Wow.
So the coincidence of that was pretty odd. And then, of course, to know that Reba McEntire owned the publishing company that wrote the song that I played the song for in the first place. So, you know, and you can't copyright a title. That to me was like a very expensive lesson where I'm like, interesting. But, you know, what am I going to do? It was the same vibe, the same. It was a slow song. It was a ballad. It was about if you see this person in this town where you're going, tell them I said hello, you know, and their song was the same as mine, which was the same as Bob Dylan's, you know, so I can't really do anything there anyway. And it was kind of an eye opener to say, well, just be careful. But at the same time, you know, as a writer, you kind of have to have this sort of, I don't know, this sort of attitude that, well, if they want to take it, they can do it better. Let them try.
Well,
you know?
in your case, it's almost, you could almost say you went into the Lion's Den and played your song there. You know, you came to Nashville to a publishing officer, played it. And that certainly seems like the kind of environment where a song could be considered extremely valuable and somebody's looking for something and it's a great fit. Maybe for somebody who's in the middle of nowhere, Musicville, and they're just thinking about putting their music on YouTube because they want to start getting exposure. I don't know.
I would just say I would try it. And just, I mean, personally, I'm just giving my 2 cents. I mean, especially if it's something copywritten.
Well, so that was part of their question, I think, was how do I copyright it?
Well, you know, there's Form PA and there's Form SR. And Form PA is the actual copyright of the song. So you write the words and you write the music. That is a copyright for that song. Form SR is the form of the sound recording. It copyrights the recording, not the song. So a lot of people think, well, I'll just, you know, Form SR is multiple songs. You can do multiple songs. So basically, if you do a record, you copyright the record on Form SR. You just copyright the whole record on one shot for one price. Whereas Form PA, I believe it's still, those are still the 2 letters that people use. It's been so long because I've had publishers do it. I don't have to do that anymore.
Is this sort of like Library of Congress online?
Yes, it is.
Form?
And you get those forms and you can just do it online. I don't think you need the form. And then you send a recording of the song, the words and music, and then you send a lyric sheet if you want to do that. Some people will just mail it to themselves, that old thing where you got the postmark on it, but it's just safer to do through the copyright office. And then your song is copywritten. And then if you have some crazy kind of mojo on this vocal that you're using, or these crazy guitar sounds that you came up with, or, you know, this backwards trippy thing that's really exclusive to your song, then you use Form SR to copyright that. So the sound of the song is copywritten. But there's a whole nother sticky wicket of like, well, how do you know that, you can't copyright a Mellotron riff. A lot of times, man, there's so much going on. There's so much music going on that just getting noticed is like a success story these days.
Yeah.
Because there's so many things going on. And so if you get noticed even, to me, that's great, because then someone knows what you're doing. I know a lot of people who sit on songs and no one will ever hear them.
Yeah.
So, you can take your chances. I mean, you might get burned, and
well, that was sort of my gut reaction when I heard the question was, you're asking the wrong question. And not to be unfair, but just thinking that if you're even asking that question, maybe you're in a position where your greatest need is to just be noticed and start getting your music out there.
Right.
And so just go for it, put it out there. I know in the world of business, a lot of people talk about, this fear of sharing your business idea, when the lesson is that doesn't matter. I mean, in some places it might, maybe in Silicon Valley it does, or something.
iPhone technology or something.
But that's it doesn't matter, because really it's like the follow through and it's the everything. It's maybe with the music too. I mean, it's like, your song, the value of the song ultimately will also symbiotically live with the artist that is building a career off it or performing it, or what the setting is. So, I
mean, you're going to get screwed in this business one way or the other.
So you might as well get started. Get it over with.
Yeah. Get used to the way it feels.
All right. So let me jump into a couple more questions about the studio too, because you had a lot of experience there. What should people know about running a great recording session? What's some advice for making sure your recording session goes really smooth?
I guess, a lot of it has to do with attitude, because it's how people perform and how people, it really is, like we mentioned, Robert, he's a genius at getting people in that mood. No one wants to be browbeaten. No one wants to be yelled at. No one wants to be rushed. It's kind of about creating a vibe, that everyone can work comfortably in. And if you're talking about multiple people, obviously that's a sticky wicket to try and, if the drummer's kind of a type A and the artist is really kind of scared and nervous about their first production, or they've never done this before or whatever, and the guitar player's got a 2:00, everyone's got their own thing, as with life, So
wait, what in Nashville parlance? What does that mean if the guitar player's got a 2:00?
Well, that they're busy, that they're actually working, which is rare these days. But typically, there's in the old school way, there was union sessions where there'd be 3-hour sessions. So there'd be and typically they would start at 10 in the morning. So there'd be a 10 to 1, and then a 2 to 6 or 2 to 5, and then a 6 to 8 or 9 or whatever. And the studio days were broken up into 3-hour blocks because of the union, not because of any other reason.
Yeah. And the musicians get to smoke cigarettes and go have a beer and eat in those hour-long breaks. Right. But the engineers get set up for the next session,
they're
right?
Stuck. Yeah, they're stuck. They're chained to the board, which is where they always end up.
But don't worry, you're rock stars too. We all are.
Yeah, everyone's a rock star. Just like, everyone's a home run hitter. The theory is that, you'd be playing one session at one studio at 10 to 1, and then you go have lunch somewhere. And then in the good old days, you'd go to even another studio where other gear would be already set up for you to play the 2 to 6 or whatever, 2 to 5. Those days are gone. No one even pays for cartage anymore. Cartage is where they take your gear and set it up for you. So when you get there, your drum set is already set up just the way you like it and everything. And, in the good old days, the big players would have multiple kits where they'd have drums set up at Ocean Way from 10 to 1 session. Then they're over at Blackbird from a 2 to 5 or 2 to 6. And then they go home, or they have a third session and they've worked for 9 hours and, gotten really good money, and their drums are all being torn down and moved back to their cartage companies while they're sleeping at home, So those are the good old days. Nowadays, though, no one really has any money to pay for cartage unless you're talking about master records. And
the cartage opportunity was a great first job opportunity too.
For a lot of people, yeah. As a matter of fact, the cartage company made more than the players sometimes. Like a drum cartage company would make $150, and sometimes the player would only make $150 plus health and welfare for a demo union session, So the cartage company and the drums are making as much money as the drummer. To get back to the question, like a good session, kind of have to be a people reader, and just kind of see what people's levels of endurance are. And that also helps when you work with people frequently. So you kind of know how people are going to react in a given situation.
Well, let me flip the question around a little bit. I know that you've sort of steered yourself away from the engineering side, but you probably witness stuff happening around you. What are some of the ways that the technology that you see commonly failing on a recording session and needing to be sort of repaired, or you're like, let's deal with that so that we can get back on track?
That happens. That still happens. Back in the old days, we'd have to wait for the tape to rewind. Now we have to wait for someone to get on the internet and figure out what Pro Tools 10, what this workaround is to make this work or whatever, or call the help desk,
or like my new Tascam DR40 that's recording this interview.
I wasn't going to say anything, but
figure out how to get the limiter to turn off.
There's always something, and you kind of have to factor that in, budget for that, time wise. And a lot of people get kind of jumpy about it. And part of my job is to sort of not be that jumpy guy so that I'm not extending that anxiety onto the session, and just making a joke or, hey, let's go get some coffee and take 5.
We had good coffee runs on that Stephanie Quayle record. I remember that.
There's always good coffee runs.
What about headphones? I mean, is there like something that you've seen commonly working really well in the land of headphones for musicians on a session? Never.
Headphones never work. No, obviously when you have the luxury of having a big, headphone mixer, they can have their own mix, create their own mix. And obviously that's a great thing, but sometimes it's a luxury. It's not always that easy. A lot of people don't like to use headphones. Simple fact, a lot of singers hate wearing them. And so, that obviously becomes a problem.
How do you manage that? How do you record a singer without them wearing headphones?
A lot of times at the studio that I work at a lot, we'll just have them sing into the, in the speakers, like in the room, and just kind of have them be more of a lot. A lot of times that will actually save a session, believe it or not. Whereas a singer who's not used to wearing headphones, or, is just the first day with the headphones and they're just cranked, and you go in to hear what they're hearing, and it's like, my God, how do you, there's nothing else.
There's not enough coffee in the city to fix that problem.
Or the opposite, where they're not loud enough. And a lot of times people just aren't comfortable wearing that, they're confining. And so, that is one of the luxuries, though, of working one track at a time. A lot of times, if the instrument isn't an acoustic instrument, we could just sit out in the main room and just sit there and talk about it as it goes down, and the amps are in another room or whatever, or going direct or whatever.
Yeah.
So the only real issue there is the drums or acoustic guitars or the vocal.
Well, there's something that you just touched on, which is really key, I find, in production in the studio, is the ability to talk.
Yeah.
It's the ability to have a conversation and communicate with everybody.
Right. Back in the old days, a lot of those studios, everyone was in the same room. Like, in Motown, Gold Star in LA and stuff, a lot of those players were all like on top of one another, So I think there's something about that too that makes it more magical. There's more communication.
Yeah.
Whereas if someone's in another part of the building and there's no line of communication, sight line, that's tough, because then you're kind of isolated. You're on your own little planet,
or when there's an instrument that's just so loud you can't even talk over it to somebody.
Yeah. Or my personal experience, a lot better results usually are gotten by having the conversation and trying kind of one-on-one, having someone in and they can listen to everything that's been done and then add their thing. And, I know that's not the old way, and again, it's,
one brick at a time. I call it building a house one brick at a time.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But great records were made the other way, obviously. Yet I think that today's world of sort of need it now, and a lot of people are kind of distracted. I hate to say it, but a lot of players are distracted, and they're worried more about their next session or their newest piece of gear instead of the song. And
what's that little communication device they're holding in their hand all day long too, right?
Yes, exactly. That never leaves their hand. In a way, it almost forces you to get into the song more when it's just you. I remember the first few sessions, demo sessions I did as a writer at Curb were maddening. I didn't realize the sort of Nashville way where they'll look at the chart, they'll play the song down, and instead of the chart is they're going through the motions basically. They're not really reading the chart. They're not really even hardly listening to the song. They're talking about, joking about what they did last night or whatever, while your song is playing. And this is your baby that they're not paying attention to here. Great results have been gotten that way, but it doesn't work for me. To me, that's offensive. And over the years, I've learned that if someone does that, that will be the last session I hire them on.
Wow, interesting.
Because I demand people to be invested in it.
Yeah.
A lot of times the artist I'm working with, this is all the money they have. And this is really super important to them. You're not going to be fucking talking over their demo, their work tape, half reading the chart. Learn the song, listen to it. Give me some suggestions of what you're going to do. So consequently, I don't use a lot of the sort of rank and file Music Row session guys on sessions anymore. Not because I don't respect them, not because I don't think they're great. They just don't work for what I want.
Right. You want the musicians to own the song.
Yeah, I want investment. And so consequently, a lot of the players I use are band guys. Like guys from band that played in the Wallflowers or the Black Crows or the Counting Crows or whatever.
Yeah.
That are all here.
I know those
they're
guys.
all friends. Yeah, you know them all too. They come from a different perspective. Most of those guys have had to learn the songs before they record them. So they've got a perspective of, I'm going to invest in this song, as opposed to, I'll just fucking play my 1-4-5 changes in my new box and, I'll get my new amp and I'll try that new box out that I got. A lot of the people that are producing these sessions or these songwriters, they're just like, they're so enraptured by the whole process that they don't notice. But I've been here a while and I've noticed them. I just don't like that attitude, that cavalier attitude of someone's song. I do a lot of slings and arrows on Facebook. I suffer a lot of slings and arrows for my posts, but I'm very opinionated. I think it's disrespectful and really, really, really wrong when these players will get on their Facebook pages and post just another day, and just, kind of laugh their way through. I don't like that, man. It's too personal to me.
Yeah.
I'm a songwriter too. That's my baby that they're talking about,
Yeah, I have to say, I can't really think of an instance where I've ever posted something on social media about music that I was doing and was bitching about it.
Right.
Like I'm always either bragging about it, or at least I'm trying to act like I'm bragging about it.
Right. Or flattered that you're part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yet, the whole sort of like, these writers, they don't know when to stop using the flat sevens. Well, yeah, that's probably true. But, this is your job, man. If you don't like it, there's plenty of other people that'll be glad to do it and probably even do it better. So just shut up and do it. And make it better. Instead of complaining about the song you're playing,
make it great.
Make it great. Find a way to make it better. The other thing I hate is when someone posts on Facebook about, like, they're a session player and they'll be playing a song and they'll say, doesn't this guitar sound great? We all know what you're doing here. You're not fooling anybody. It's not about the guitar, man. You don't have a lot of work and you're reminding people that you have a gig. You can do this. So just relax. Everyone just take 5 here. Take a deep breath. If you're complaining about what you're doing for a living, you should maybe do something else.
That's good advice.
And if you're complaining about the song you're playing, then maybe you should be hired by better people. So don't complain and do better, and then other better people will hire you. And yet you shouldn't look at it that way either, because who's better than who?
So I was just about to segue into our break before going to the jam session, but you brought up one point that I'd like to ask you one question before we do that. What makes a great song?
That really depends too on a lot of factors. I don't really think anyone knows. Maybe Paul McCartney might probably know.
Do you know when you hear one?
I think everyone does for their own. To me, a great song can be the riff. It could be the hook. It could be the melody. It could be the drum part. It could be, when I produce artists, I ask them to make me a list of songs, either for Spotify or on a CD, even preferably, what songs they love and why. Why do they like that? Like, why does someone like Philadelphia Freedom by Elton John? Why does someone like, I don't know, pick any song, God Only Knows by the Beach Boys, or why, and what is it about that song that you love? Is it the vibe? Is it the mood? Is it the drum pattern? Is it the vocal, the treatment of the vocals? Is it what the little extraneous instruments are doing? So it helps me do shorthand. So
it's like they're teaching you their language.
Yeah. So we can go in the studio together and make a record without having to explore all those options, although we still do sometimes. But this way, at least, I know what you like and what you don't like.
Yeah. And that's smart too, because it's not asking the artist to say, play me your favorite drum sound as if, oh, now we have to go create that drum sound on this record. It's just like, just show me stuff you like.
Yeah. So, getting back to the original question of what makes a great song, I guess it just depends on the song and it depends on what you like. But I've got songs that I love for multiple different reasons, And as a songwriter, obviously, you always want to try and crack that code. Yesterday, I was listening to Fleetwood Mac and I was listening to Go Your Own Way. And the counter acoustic guitar melody at the beginning, without that, the original version, the demo version, didn't have that. And it was a totally different song. And yet, it's just a small element of the song. I mean, it has nothing to do really with the song, but at the top of the song, it's offbeat. So it throws your ear off. So you don't know where the beat is, where the one is.
I love that.
Yeah.
Love that trick.
And Lindsay actually talks on, and this is a great tip, by the way, for any of you people that want to know these kind of studio tricks. There was a series on VH1 called Classic Albums.
Love that series.
Great series. Yeah, I'm sure you knew about it, but where they have they'll do a classic record like they did Fleetwood Mac Rumors, or they did like Pink Floyd, I think it was Dark Side of the Moon. And, Elton John, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Stevie Wonder songs, The Key
Frank Zappa apostrophe.
Right, Zappa apostrophe. A lot of things on the internet, on YouTube especially, where you could watch them kind of dissect the track. It's a really good lesson for people who are making records as artists, because they learn that there's a lot of clams in those amazing songs hidden in there, and I mean, a lot of times it's really important that that that's okay. Yeah. Because otherwise the temptation is just to beat the song into the ground till there's absolutely no musicality left in it, and then the artist is happy, a new artist, a baby artist. But, a more mature artist will realize, hey, that's part of the game, man. Like I listen to Rod Stewart, Maggie May, and there's a very distinct bass clam in that song. Or Paul McCartney in Hey Jude, where he says, fuck, if you know where it is, you'll never hear that song the same again. It sounds like he's going, oh, but it's really he's saying fuck because he hit the wrong note, but it's still in the track.
That's great.
And, and I mean, this is the Beatles. This is like as good as it ever got musically for a lot of people. And yet they left that in there. Part of it was probably because they were in a hurry. Part of it was because they couldn't do it better. Whatever the reason is, it's there. And sometimes that's what makes the great song, the wrongness of it,
Yeah, I think that's perfect, man. I think on that note of the Beatles and Paul McCartney yelling fuck on a recording, that's a perfect segue into our break. And we'll come right back in a moment for the jam session. But before we do Rockstars, just remind you once more that you can find the show notes for everything we're talking about, links to the new Dylans, Jim's work, and some of the things we're discussing at rsrockstars.com, and then just search Jim Reilley. It'll take you right to the blog post. And then if you're on your iPhone, you can just pull up the iPhone podcast app and just click right through, and you should see the show notes right there. So you don't even have to write anything down. You can just click through with your finger. So we'll take a break, and we'll be back in 1 sec for the jam session. Hey everybody, it's Lid Shaw, and I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of Recording Studio Rockstars. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate your time. And as a way of saying thank you, I've created a special mix tutorial just for you, Rockstars, totally free, called the Mix Master Bundle. With it, you get over 2 hours of detailed videos watching over my shoulder as I mix a song in my studio. Plus, I give you the free ebook that explains how I recorded the tracks. And you get downloadable multitracks so that you can practice your mixes, including the Pro Tools session file, using nothing but stock plugins in Pro Tools, all of which you would find in any other DAW, whether you're on Logic or Studio One or Reaper. Maybe you're struggling with trying to improve your mix technique, or maybe you just simply don't have access to multitrack files or can't record a full drum set in your studio. I wanted to give you a chance to create your own mixes from full drum kit, bass, and guitars recorded in my studio. The song is called American Winter, and it's off my instrumental record Skadoosh, and it's all available for you totally free right now. All you need to do to get it is text Mix Master Bundle to 33444, and I'll send it directly to your email. Again, that's Mix Master Bundle with no space to 33444, or you can go directly to mixmasterbundle.com, enter your email, and I'll send all the files directly to you. Thanks so much, Rockstars. We'll see you guys in the jam session. Cheers. It's Lid Shaw, and we're back here with Recording Studio Rockstars. My guest today is Jim Reilley, and we're about to jump into the jam session. Jim, are you ready to jam, my friend? I knew you would be, dude. So tell us, when you started out in recording and songwriting, what was one of the biggest things that was holding you back?
I guess probably my lack of knowledge, maybe, or my insecurity. I just was kind of like, I don't really know what's going on. And I haven't really learned anything, but the only thing I learned was that no one knows, so just go for it.
Well, I know you guys I didn't know much about your story before the 1986 release.
Yeah.
But when that release came out, it seems like you guys kind of rocketed a little bit, had a little bit
Rocketed to nowhere.
Rocketed to nowhere.
Right to the middle. We naively we did vinyl albums. We actually did a fundraising campaign with our friends back in 1986. It wasn't called Kickstarter back then. It was called Desperation.
It's called Kick Your Ass.
Yeah, kick our ass, please, hard. So we asked all our friends for $50 and we put their name on the album. Back in 1986, vinyl album was a big deal. Right. Now, every barista at the coffee shop has a box set, but back then, if you had a record, it was a big fucking deal. And if you could hold it like a tangible album, and it was all vinyl still back then.
Plus, you can fit a lot of names on the back of a 12-inch vinyl.
Absolutely, you can. Yeah, if you do it right. We went around and got our friends to contribute money so we could make our record. We naively started sending out these records to every address we got from our friends 10,000 Maniacs, and they at the time had just kind of broken. So we were sending to Elektra Records in New York, and Anthony DeCurtis from Rolling Stone, and Robert Christgau from The Village Voice. And the next thing you know, we're in The Village Voice top 5 albums of the year, 1986. Wow. Michael Stipe from REM calls us one of his favorite records of the year. We're getting calls from New York from Elektra Records that wanted us to come visit. We go meet Anthony DeCurtis at Rolling Stone in 1986, Bill Flanagan, all these people that are like huge now, were huge even then.
Yeah.
And we're just like a couple of rubes from Pennsylvania. We don't know what we're doing, and that was the thing. We didn't know what we were doing. And that was part of the charm, I think, of it, that we didn't.
Yeah.
We weren't business oriented. Our music was good. They liked it. And it's pretty honest.
Yeah. And your bio talked about your initial breakup of the band.
Yeah.
As you described it as if you guys started thinking that regular domestic life sounded real good and you'd go give that a try. And,
right.
And then after you did it, you realized it wasn't quite as much fun as playing in a band.
None of that. That was all just, a joke. But we get these offers to tour with like Lone Justice, do this tour with Lone Justice. We don't have a band. And they're like, well, why are you why are you here? Yeah, why are you anything? It was really, we didn't know what to do. We were really kind of stuck. So we broke up first time. And then got back together again in 91 and went from 91 to 98. By then, we were just fried from touring. We
got back together in 91 after Nevermind was released by Nirvana, and you saw the light.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. I like the album cover picture. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, how about some of the best advice you received?
I think probably the best advice musically, I guess, probably here in Nashville. And I guess it isn't necessarily studio related, but it's as a songwriter. Roger Sovine, who was at the time the head of BMI, when I first got here 20 years ago, I met with him and he really loved what I was doing. He said there's two kinds of songwriters that come to Nashville, and I still use this today. But he said there are two kinds of songwriters. One that comes here and looks around and says, oh shit, and goes back home. And the other is looks around and says, yeah, I can do this. And then after that, there's two decisions you have to make. You either become a songwriter that writes for the market and is a co-writer and writes specific songs for a specific type of role or a specific need of a song, or you just write songs. Chances are the writer that writes for that specific need is probably going to be a lot richer and a lot better off monetarily, but not necessarily as a fulfilled artist. So you kind of have to decide, are you going to be I hate to say the prostitute, but are you going to be the writer that writes for the market and is, notices all the trends and maybe isn't necessarily writing a lot from the heart? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But a lot of times you go and get the last record made by so-and-so and listen to all the tracks and then write something similar. Or do you just write songs and hope they get a home? And, sometimes those songwriters, it pays off too, but often not so much for those
Well,
writers.
what I know about your writing is that it always seems like it's honest and it's got substance to it.
Well, thanks.
And I appreciate it. It's cool. It's got an element of cool to it. How often do you write about pickup trucks and beer and fishing and girls and
I can't, because so many people do it so much better than I can. I know that. Because when I try, if I ever were to try and write something, it wouldn't sound genuine. Not that it does to begin with, but it certainly doesn't when I do it.
Yeah.
And so I'm not, that's not my thing, and I'm not that guy. And I'm fine with that. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are multimillionaires from those kind of songs.
Yeah.
And yet when I go to play with them at the Bluebird and someone requests that song, they don't play it because they're embarrassed by it. So I'm thinking, why would I have devoted my whole life to something that I'd be embarrassed to do in public? So I don't write those songs. And I have no problem with them doing it. They're good for them, man. Maybe they can loan me some money. But at the same time, I didn't sacrifice as much as my wife and I have for the last 20 years and almost 30 years of being married and 30 years of my life in this business to be that.
Or to be unsatisfied. Right?
Yeah. And I know that sounds like a cop out and it sounds like, whatever, sour grapes, but it's really not. I'm very comfortable with where I am in my career, and I'm very happy with what I've achieved. I would love to walk out to the mailbox and get a check for $900,000. At the same time, it's probably not going to happen for me, but that's okay because I'm making a living doing what I want to do.
Yeah, it's great. That's worth a lot right there. All right, so let's jump to the next one. Can you share with us a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce?
Doubled vocals, old school. I love a doubled chorus. I love little ear tricks, little ear candy. So, it's not so much about like you all must always use this converter or this microphone or whatever. That being said, an SM7 goes a long way for a vocal mic.
I think we use that on our session.
I think so. I think I love them, and they work for Michael Jackson. They work for U2.
How about a drum trick that happens at the drums, not at the gear?
Get the drummer to play in time. If you can do that, you got it made. No.
What does that mean, though? How do you measure time for a drum?
What is time in drums? Yeah.
The drums against something, right?
Yeah, I think there's really no excuse, though, or no replacement for a well-tuned drum set. There's a lot of great records that sound like hell because the drums aren't tuned right. And, there's some great drummers in town who know how to tune a kit, and it's magic when it's tuned right. And, I know that sounds really old school, but in terms of it's not necessarily a trick, but it's definitely a necessity. It's like you tell a guitar player to make your tone better. It's all in the hands. Tuning drums, man, if the drums aren't in tune right, it just sounds terrible.
Have you ever tossed your wallet across the control room, or across to the drummer, throw this on your snare?
Oh, no. No, because they'd probably take it and try and take all the money out.
You were the high-paid producer on the session.
Yeah, right. Of course, that's the assumption, right? No, tea towels. Ringo was always right on those tea towels. There's so many people hitting the drums with different things, and drummers are, they're always trying to make new sounds which is great. I love when drummers are inventive like that. So those days of finding mutes and things like that can accentuate certain frequencies and stuff are always really great. And I prefer not to use a lot of plugins on drums and stuff. I like an honest drum sound.
Well, so now share with us a favorite hardware tool for the studio, something that when you go in to produce sessions or as a writer and you've got this thing with you, it always seems to make the sessions go better.
There's really not a whole lot of excuse for for the SM7. That's one of my favorite mics. And, there's so many people that do mic shootouts. Who didn't do those? The Beatles,
Didn't do mic shootouts?
Yeah, the Rolling Stones. I think it's just kind of silly in a way, just get sing into the microphone that's there and make it work. But that being said, the SM7's pretty rugged and, it's very universal mic. So is a U87 or a U47, whatever. But you can't really go wrong with that on vocals for almost anybody. If there's one little thing that'd be that. Those mics are great. And so I love those.
Right on. All right. How about a favorite software tool? Something that always helps you out in the sessions.
That's tough for me. I don't really know. I guess I could say Reason Abbey Road strings on Reason, Abbey Road keys on Reason.
Okay. All right, cool.
Abbey Road samples like the Mrs. Mills piano and the Mellotron and all that stuff. I mean, those are amazing and they sound great and they fit in a track really well. It's funny, a lot of times those fit in a track better than a real piano.
Interesting.
Depending on the track.
Probably, yeah. They're probably less crowded by the shape and size of the room, too.
Right. And the scope of the range of the piano.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to prompt you a little bit.
Okay.
And I appreciate you going straight for what you interpreted as an audio software tool. But you got an iPhone sitting right in front of you.
Yeah.
You're a writer.
Yeah.
You use the internet all the time. I see you with your laptop when you're camped out at the coffee shop and stuff. How about some tools that are part of the writing and creative process that are really useful to you in that world?
It's really hard to get away from the iPhone. There's a thing called Music Memos, which puts
that's the new one, right?
with drums and everything. It's kind of funny, but I've just started playing around with it, and it doesn't get it. Sometimes it doesn't lock in on the like if you play a catchy downbeat, it's not going to catch that. But I love that, and and then I also use the Guitar Toolkit a lot for.
Okay, is that the name of the app? Guitar Toolkit.
Guitar Toolkit, and it's like $10. But I use a lot of open tunings.
Okay.
And it allows me to list and catalog every open tuning I have. So there's like 20 open tunings on here.
Very cool.
And I could just go to it. And, the funny thing about it is you can it'll play the notes and, on the string. So you'll hear.
So you can remember what the tuning was.
Right. So that's one of my tunings.
Wow.
And here's another one. That's the New Dylan's Complicated. And then this is a CGCGGE, which is a really cool, for acoustic guitar, those kind of tunings. Basically, you just write in the notes and then you can hear the strum and it'll tune. And you can use it as a tuner.
Naming the tunings in there in the app and stuff like that.
Right, yeah.
What's the process for you of capturing a song? When you have, when you've just come up with an idea and it's capoed somewhere funny and it's a weird tuning and stuff. What are the steps that you always go through to sign off it and close your notebook and be done for the day?
Oh, I see. Well, it's difficult for me because I don't read music.
Okay.
So I can't write down notation and stuff like that. And I don't read number charts.
Don't even mess with charts.
No, I don't do. I remember.
We had a lot of charts on that session though.
We did, yeah. I just memorized the songs. And so that requires a lot of mind work on my part, but I mean, it's the only way I really know how to do it. Like if I'm in C, I know what a 4 is. You know what I mean? It doesn't help me to know that if I'm in C, what the 4 is, and if I go to D, I know what the 4 is there too. But it doesn't make it any faster for me. I just know that the 4 of D is G. I just know that. Why do I need to know the number? It's just, to me, it's an extra step. So I don't really know why that's useful, but I'm sure it is. I have to write down the tuning, and I'll occasionally even take a photo, an iPhoto or a shelf.
Oh, of your fingers on the strings? Of my fingers,
yeah. So I know what the fretting is on that and stuff. Because I won't remember.
Yeah.
It's kind of caveman-y the way I do it.
Does your photo and your guitar tools tuning and your lyric doc, does that all go into a folder or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, once I learn it, and I don't often play out the songs I co-write anyway. Like usually when I'm writing a song for myself, that's when I play it out. I'll learn those a lot better than if I'm like, I wrote one this morning. I probably won't play that song out unless it becomes a number one, hint, hint.
Might you never even play that song again?
Probably not. Yeah, unless I play the demo.
Although you'd spend a lot.
If
you're writing songs every day, there's not enough days to play all those songs again.
Yeah, and not every song gets demoed.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, that's great stuff. Glad I prodded you for some of those tips too. Now, here's a hypothetical question. Imagine yourself starting over again in some strange new town like you did here a long time ago, and you needed some simple setup to record with.
Right.
You needed to find people to record and write songs with. And then you needed to make ends meet so you could keep going while you were doing all that stuff. Mm-hmm. What advice would you have for that?
Get one of those things you got with a limiter on it. I need a limiter.
The Tascam DA40 or DR40.
DR40. It wouldn't probably be much different. I would have to find a studio, that I could work with and camp at. And so I guess if is that part of the
I think that's legit. Yeah, that's great. I don't think anybody said I'm not going to have my own rig. I'll just go find one. You're the first one to say that. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have the mind for that. That's not my thing. I guess I'm not a studio rock star. I'm more of a pretender. I admire it. I appreciate it. And I know enough to sort of, I know where the CDs come out.
Right. Yeah, totally.
Go to the board. That's my first thing when I go to a new studio. I'm like, where do the CDs come out of this thing? And everyone's like, "Yo, shut up, asshole." I would have to find a good place that I could be comfortable in and create. And if I did have to get, something a little more that I would have to have at home, I suppose probably a good laptop. I would find someone to show me how to use Pro Tools on my Apple.
I think your answer is really insightful. I think I've seen you do that over at Eric's. My understanding of what you guys would do, or what I did with you, is, you found this place where you're like, this is my jam right here. This is my studio. This is where I'm gonna sit.
Yeah.
When I'm making records.
Yeah, I need to be comfortable.
And everything works. And,
yeah.
and we can just come in here with a bunch of good people and get to work.
Yeah.
And I think that's encouraging for some people who might, also be producer and writing focused and want to just really think about the music more than the buttons and the knobs still,
Right.
To know that's a great way to do it. In the end, it's about making the records and making the music.
At the end of the day,
I don't ultimately care whether I turn a knob or push a mouse, or a fader, or get to play the guitar. I'm just trying to make music with people I like.
Yeah, that's the end result. That's why we're here. We've been hired,
All right, so here's the last doozy of a question. What's the single most important thing our listeners should do to become a rock star of the recording studio themselves?
I guess probably listen a lot. So much time is spent on creating, and that's really important too. That's as important even as listening, but make your music. Make it so you like it. Please yourself. It's not really about anything other than pleasing yourself at this point. But at the same time, I think it's really important to listen to what has come before. I think it's really important, though, to know what has come before so that you know what not to do or what to violate or what to emulate, because you're not the first one doing this, even though you might think you are. It'll inform you in a lot of ways, and I think it'll also be like it's the notes you don't play as much as the notes you do play, and that kind of stuff. And I know that's all kind of granola-y bullshit, but there's a lot to it. And when you're in a session and you lay out on the first verse and that's the right thing to do,
that's hard to get to that point.
To do that, because a lot of people, if you don't know what you're doing, if people don't, they either think, well, why aren't you playing here?
I didn't want to lay out for years.
Right.
It took me a long time. Then when I finally discovered it, and you go back and listen again later, it's like, holy shit, that's much better when I'm not playing.
And you listen, and when you listen back and you learn about dynamics and you learn about like building, the track builds to a place and then maybe falls off or maybe keeps going. It doesn't happen when everything's playing all in at one time. Everything from the top, everyone go. There's the temptation to like, well, we'll mute it later. If you don't have to do that, it'll inspire how you play. Like if you don't come into the second verse, you're going to play differently than if you just play through and mute to the second verse.
Right,
it's just a different entrance. There's an entrance point.
That works better for tambourine overdubs.
Sure. Or maracas. What has come before, though, is dictated what you're going to play. And so if you're just all in from the top, you're not going to play the same as if you come in with especially like drummers and stuff. Like if a drummer comes in on the second verse, that entrance is a big moment. Whereas if you're just playing along and then you mute till then, that's totally different. Study that kind of stuff and listen and make notes on why is it that I keep referencing Elton John here? But why is it that Nigel Olsson doesn't come in till the second chorus? Because that's the moment that it's the best moment for him to come in. He's confident enough to know that he doesn't have to do it until then. And his music is playing is going to be enough without having to prove to everybody that every drum fill known to mankind until that moment. If you're good, you don't worry about stuff like that. And that's why people will respect your playing, is if your confidence shows and your maturity shows. And so laying out is sometimes the most important thing you could ever do.
That's great. Great advice.
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome advice to close up on too. Jim Reilley, thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars.
My pleasure.
We could keep going, man. I could just keep prodding you for great, hilarious stories.
We'll do part 2.
All right, so tell our listeners how they can learn more about you and find you on the internet.
Well, I mean, I guess probably the most important thing right now for me is the New Dillons project. So that's just thenewdillons.com, THENEWDYLANS.com. We also have a Facebook page, Facebook / the New Dillons, or Twitter if you want to hear our fun little comments about life. I have a Facebook page, just Jim Reilley, REILLEY, but you probably wouldn't want to go there. It's not for the faint of heart. And I have, songs on iTunes. My solo record, The Return of Buddy Cruel, is on iTunes. New Dillons records are all on iTunes or Spotify. So.
If somebody's perhaps searching for stronger opinions on social media, they might come seek you out on Facebook.
For a while, until I say something that'll just alienate them.
Groovy. Well, hey, thanks so much, Jim.
Thank
really
you.
A pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you around the studio.
Same here.
Or the writer's room. Or the coffee shop.
Or whatever.
Or the streets of Nashville.
Or the Swedish musicians.
Swedish musicians. That's right. It's coming up. All right. Cheers, man. Thanks.
Same to you, man.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.